Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell, here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 116, How to Identify a Good Lead Gen Agency. If you've listened to the show before, you'll know that we've talked a lot about how to find good lead gen suppliers. But today we're going to sort of really focus in on identifying the good agencies. So Simon, let's start with the basics. Why are we focusing on agencies specifically, and how is that different to just finding good generators?
So, as you'll know on this podcast, and for those unlucky enough to follow me on LinkedIn, you'll know we constantly talk about like strategies, tactics to buy leads, how to make things better, make deeper connections with people, don't just treat people like data, yada yada yada. And what we've spoken about internally and what we've identified is it can be really difficult for brands and advertisers buying leads to actually implement some of these strategies and tactics, right? Because they're very set, formulaic ways of doing things. And so one of the ways that they can actually take a massive leap up in their lead buying capabilities is using agencies that don't have the same potential constraints that brands and advertisers have. They can get the technology that enables really good lead buying. They potentially have the expertise, they have the people and knowledge. And so when you start percolating this idea around in your mind of like, how do we really help companies that buy leads as the end lead buyer take that massive transformation and stop concentrating on leads and start focusing on end results and sales and really strong outcomes. And often you come back like, they need someone in the middle that's going to sort this shit out. So you've got all the lead generators they need to work with. And that's great if you can build a direct relationship with them, but often they can't. So that's why we need to address that.
Especially agencies. Well, let's begin this with the perspective of the brand. So imagine I'm a brand listening to this. What, in simple terms, is the benefit of working with an agency rather than doing your own lead gen, or even just identifying and working with a collection of lead generators? Is it to do with scale or other things?
Yeah, so one of them is scale. So I think it's kind of, there's a few. So one of them is contractual. So if you're a brand working with multiple lead generators, you need to have contracts with lots of different companies. And for anyone that's worked with any brands, you can be aware that you can have months of wrangling over like contract terms, and nobody wants to get into that. So one of them is this why it makes it a hell of a lot easier working with one company that can sign all of that off and then have their own contractual obligations on the back of it. The other is, and it's something that we advocate, is that you should try and spread the risk with your lead buying in the same way that you do your media buying. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket because that can impact quality, conversions, volumes, whatever. So in order to get rid of those fluctuations in performance, you need to buy from as many places as possible. And obviously, if you can't sort that out contractually, you don't know the sources and don't have anyone that can put time and effort into finding them and then measure the performance of them, like what you're going to do. You kind of need to work with an agency. So there's like a few different reasons why there are actual benefits to working with agencies, to working with middlemen.
Yeah. So it sounds a little bit like a lot of the things we discussed on these 116 episodes.
I believe it's actually 117, isn't it? Because one of them, we put a special episode and didn't give it a number.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. We'll stick to the numbers. This is 116, so around that. But we talk about these ideas, and a lot of the time, maybe brands are thinking it's difficult to do these things. Like, maybe it seems quite a challenge or intimidating is the idea that you would essentially outsource these tasks to the agency, and the agency can do these things we're talking about on behalf of the brand.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really the key with the agency, is they need to act as an extension of the company that is ultimately buying the leads, because if they're not adding value, they're just creaming off the top. They're making money for really not doing very much. So yeah, the idea is that the agency is actually helping the brand take a massive leap up in terms of the performance of the campaigns that they're running when they're buying leads. If they're not doing that, they're kind of like in the way. You know, you may as well just move out of the way and let the brand work directly with whoever they want to work with.
Okay, so let's imagine that I'm still branding this scenario. You've convinced me. I want to find an agency to do lead gen with. What do they need to be conscious of when they're looking at agencies? How do they find the good ones?
So really, it's transparency, right? Like, that's the number one thing. But that's quite a broad term. So if we're to break that down slightly, you're really looking for someone who has deep knowledge of a vertical that you're operating in. So let's say, I don't know, you're in energy and you're British Gas and you're wanting to buy leads to put into your call center, or, you know, put into the marketing team, whatever. You want to be working with an agency that has deep knowledge of that vertical. Like, they know where energy leads are generated. They've potentially worked with other energy companies before. They understand the nuances of it. So that's number one, is like deep knowledge of the vertical. The other is deep knowledge of how leads perform and the transition from them being generated and being plugged into a sales function, and the efficiencies of scale in a sales function. Yeah. So how the performance impacts the CPA based on the costs actually lowering because the conversions are increasing, and how that then translates back to the CPL that you're paying. So all these tiny little things, if an agency doesn't understand those, it's like, you know, adds warning bells in my mind. And they should also have a wide knowledge of lead gen sources and talk openly about them, I think. Like, you know, an agency has a value not based on hiding things. Because if it's based on hiding things, it's just like, it's pointless, right? So to give you like a classic example is, imagine, I don't know, you're buying banners that are outside, and you're working with an agency. You know, you've contacted WPP and said, okay, I want to run a banner campaign. I want these banners all over the country. I want them to look like this. Can you tell me the paints that you're going to use? And they're like, oh, we can't tell you the paints we're going to use. You're not allowed to know the paints we're going to use. And you're like, well, wow, what's wrong with the paints? So the sources of data are kind of the same. There is a value in knowing the sources, but that isn't really a value in itself. That's just like where the fuel comes from. The real value of an agency should be able to do what the advertiser or the brand can't do, which is the technology, the expertise, working these leads back to a CPA, improving performance constantly, onboarding new suppliers, working with sales teams to improve the sales functions, acting as like the filament, if that's the right word, between the buyer and the lead generator of the leads. So they're the sort of things that you need to be looking for. And also, I think if they're just like happy to give away tips and stuff like that as well, like it annoys me when people go like, oh, you know, I can't tell you that, I'd have to charge you, sort of thing. Because what that means is that I could easily do what you're saying you're going to tell me to do.
Yeah.
And so it's only a matter of time until I figure that out. And also, if I pay you to then do it and I see how it's done and I could easily do it, I'm like, may as well not stop paying him and do it myself. So this is why the value needs to be beyond that. And that's something that in the lead gen industry in particular, agencies have struggled with before. They've put the value in the wrong places.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's just flip it now and do me a favor and try not to say the opposite of all the things that make an agency good. But what makes a bad agency? Do you know what I mean? I would say what makes a bad agency if you're sort of looking out for those.
Yeah. So so basically, like dangers, right? That's what you're looking out for, and it is incredibly easy to make a huge amount of money as an agency sat in the middle between lead buyers and lead generators, because you have no costs. Like, there's no risk. You're just buying something. Someone else is taking all the risk on generating, and you're selling it to someone who's taking all the risk on like transforming those bits of data and those leads into something successful, and you're just sitting in the middle. But what's really interesting about this is that it's actually the buyer of those leads that controls this danger. Because if you feed back results, measure performance at the buying level, or if the agency is doing it and you're asking for reports and how things are performing, whatever, you need to be seeing things improving.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point is like this transparency works both ways. So as long as you're feeding information back, as long as you're demanding results based on the information that you're giving back, like, what are you doing with this information that I give you? If they can't answer that, or like they can't easily demonstrate what's actually happening with it, it's very easy to make money in the middle. So as a buyer of the leads, ultimately the end brand, you still need to be conscious of like the improvements and the performance that's being made, because otherwise all you're doing is buying data. You're not buying like an agency to add value, to improve performance and whatever else. So when you're working with someone, ultimately as the buyer from the agency, you are in control of their performance. But some of the other things that you want to be looking out for is, again, it sort of feeds back to this lack of transparency. Like, are they not being open about things? Are they not being open about what's happening? Who's doing what, where leads are generated, why this one's performing and why that one isn't? Are they not continually trying to optimize performance? They're not asking you constantly for updates, performance, or trying to tweak things and whatever else. So a lot of it's around the activity that they're trying to run. But as well as that, I suppose when you're initially looking at an agency and wanting to work with them, have they got like a list of clients that they're currently working with? Because most agencies and lead generators, they have like a steady stream of clients that are always buying leads, and then they'll have ones that like dip their toe in on a campaign basis and leave. So you want to be working with people that have worked with other companies for a long time, could easily give like referrals and things like that, can demonstrate the value that they add, have systems and processes set up like the ones we discuss on this podcast all the time, that add massive value. And if they don't have any of those things, there's warning signs.
Yeah. So I want to end this by just taking a slight change of direction and just bring it back to the lead generators. Because obviously we talked about how the brands, the agencies can work together, the benefits to the brand, but just for the lead generators out there, so we cover all bases, how should they feel about agencies? Like, what are the benefits potentially to them, if there are any?
So, I mean, working with not everyone will want to work with an agency, but the reality is, if the agency is in charge of the media buying for that particular brand that you want to work with, it's the only route to market, right, with them. But what the agency should be doing is trying to make the performance and the lives easier for the lead generators constantly. Build a great relationship with them, work with them on optimizing results, be completely transparent, be the open conduit between them and the end buyer, really appreciate that they're taking all the risk. In some ways, as you know, I used to run an agency doing exactly what we're talking about. And one of the mantras that we used to have is that the suppliers of the leads are just as important as the buyers of the leads. So we used to treat them like with absolute equal importance, because you can't have one without the other, right? Like as an agency sat in the middle, your job is to make sure that both sides of this coin are equally happy with what you're doing in the middle. And that I think is what it's really about. And also, you know, that you need to demonstrate to the lead generator that you're adding value as well. You know, can they, if they're performing well, if they're like not resistant to changing things that would improve performance and working with you and helping the brand further, you know, they should be getting more money, for example. If their performance increases, they should be getting more money. So all these things that we're talking about working to a CPA, because you can actually pay a higher CPL for the top performers, the agency needs to be looking after all of that. And, you know, on that basis, if the lead generators get great feedback, it improves their performance, they get a long-term campaign or client that they can work with, they'd love to work with agencies. It's just if none of those things happen, they're in the way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully whether you're a brand or a lead generator or indeed an agency, you feel confident answering that question, how to identify a good lead gen agency. And yeah, I think it's something maybe we should come back to in the future, especially maybe look at it from the perspective of the agency more next time. But hopefully we've established that. That was episode 116.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.